How many of us traveled a little lighter this week? I was thinking of some of the different ways in which we carry added weight. You know, when the weight in our lives begins to kind of pile up and we feel it, you know, we feel it in our bodies, we feel it in our faces. So we carry it in our faces, whether or not we smile. Think about crunched foreheads. Some people, you can just see the heaviness all over them. How many know what I'm talking about? And maybe you walked in here today, this morning, and you're feeling just the weight of the world, the weight of life, the pressure of life, and you feel that weight. And maybe you came in and you're carrying it on your face today. Not only do we carry it in our faces, but we carry it in our attitudes and our actions. How many have ever gone to a family event and there's just certain, family members that you just stay clear of? Make sure you don't enter into the same room as they do. Or if you see someone but maybe there's conflict, and so you see them at a store and you avoid them, do everything you can to make sure, your paths don't cross. What about anger? Snapping at other people, cranky. Everybody has a bad day, right? We all have bad days, and that's just a part of being human, part of living. But when every day seems to be a bad day, maybe there's something heavier going on, right? And so we carry that heaviness in our attitudes and our actions. We carry it in our face. Jesus said this in Matthew 11:29-30. He said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For listen, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." My yoke is easy and my burden is light. In Galatians 5:1, Paul wrote, and he said, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free." Living a free or lighter life can be ours in Christ Jesus. That's his promise. Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me," so we can learn to travel lighter. That is our destiny, but we have to seize it. We have to throw off certain weights that succumb us and the sin that so easily entangles us so that we can run the race set before us. Hebrews 12:1. Again, kind of our verse where we're landing, or our launch pad out of for this series. Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." I want to read Hebrews 12:2. So let's read the next verse as well together. "Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right-hand throne of the Father." Did you notice that? Jesus, who for the joy set before him. This speaks of the destiny, the attitude in which Jesus pursued his destiny, I should say. This speaks to his attitude, the attitude he had in pursuing his destiny. It wasn't just some lifeless duty that he had given himself to, that he was forced into, that the Father, forced him to play out, to live out. No, it says he did it who for the joy set before him. And so in that sense, it wasn't half-hearted. He was all in, full force, not reluctantly, but with joy. But with joy. See, Jesus considered it a joy to suffer for the sake of humanity, for the sake of you and I, for the sake of knowing what would come on the other side of him suffering the cross. That reality of salvation, that reality of relationship, that reality of reconciliation, not only vertically in relationship with him, but horizontally in relationship with others. See, Jesus knew what was on the other side of that. And so if it meant him suffering, he was willing to suffer. And not only did he suffer, but he suffered with joy. Who for the joy set before him. See, this was Jesus' destiny. But there were tests along the way. Both in Luke 4 and in Matthew 26, the motives of Jesus were tested. Would he carry it out with joy? How would he respond in the face of suffering, in the midst of knowing that it's coming, that road is coming? See, it's one thing to know how we're going to respond in theory. We may think we'll respond a certain way. So we can anticipate certain situations and circumstances, certain conversations, and try to prepare ourselves for how we might respond. But it's another thing to know But it's another thing to respond in the moment in those situations and circumstances. And so Jesus was tempted along the way. There were tests that tested his motivation, that tested his heart, the motives of his heart. So let's read Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 8 together. And so I'm going to go there here real quick. So Luke chapter 4. Okay, there we are. 5 through 8. It says this. But Jesus answered, saying, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God." Then the devil, taking him up on a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, "All this authority I give to you and their glory. For this has been delivered to me, and I will give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you will worship before me, all will be yours." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Get behind me, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." So this is in reference to, in Luke 4, it's in reference to Jesus as he was led into the wilderness, he was tempted, hadn't eaten. And coming out of that time, he was tempted, and it's there that Jesus responded in the way he was supposed to respond. But you think about it, what is a moment of glory worth to you and I? See, Jesus was tempted with that. The devil tempted him with a moment of glory. So would he sacrifice what would come on the other side of the cross for a moment of glory? Would he give in to the temptation? Would he want to, save all of that glory in a moment of time for himself? Or would he carry out his mission? Would he carry out the task set before him? See, Jesus, even in a state of weakness, refused to get off track from his mission. His mission was much bigger than his comfort, than his own glory. His course was set. He had to finish the assignment for which he came. John 5:19 says, "So Jesus explained, I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees the Father doing, for whatever the Father does, the Son also does." And then in Matthew 26, Jesus' motives were tested again. So in the wilderness, tempted, how would he respond? And we find that Jesus only does what he sees the Father doing. And so he responds in the way that you would expect with someone who's determined to carry out a task, to carry out his mission. And so he withstands the temptation. He says a moment of glory is not worth what's going to come down the road. And so he held his course. And then in Matthew 26, Jesus' motives were tested once again as the weight and reality, what was going around him or what was coming down, the pike, what was just around the corner, as that weight, the weight of the cross, the weight of suffering began to press in around him. It says, even in that place, Jesus didn't lose sight of the goal. Here's what he prayed in John Matthew 26 in verse 39. It says in verse 39, Jesus said, "My Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." It's like in that moment, he's thinking, is there another way? Is there another way to accomplish reconciliation for humanity? Is there another way to appease the reality and the darkness and the sinister nature of sin? Is there another way? Take this cup from me, Father, if there is. So in one breath, it's can you take this cup from me? And then in the next breath, it's, but not my will be done, but your will be done. Think about that, because there was complete vertical relational trust. Jesus could live out his horizontal life in complete confidence, in complete security, knowing that whatever he saw his Father doing is what he set his mind on doing. And nothing deterred him from that reality, because there was complete vertical relational trust. It's why he could sleep in the midst of a storm. You guys remember that storm in the Gospels where Jesus is out in the water with the disciples, and the disciples are fishing, they're doing their thing, and And Jesus is asleep in the boat, and there's a huge storm that comes, and they're afraid for their lives. The disciples are afraid for their lives. They think they're going to die. And they're like, Jesus, what are you doing sleeping? How could you be sleeping at such an intense moment in our lives? It's there that Jesus got up, and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and he told them to be still, and the storm parted and left, and they were amazed. Even in the midst of the storm, that's why Jesus could be asleep in the boat, because there's this complete vertical relational trust. It was complete. That's why he didn't have to defend himself as the religious leaders and Pharisees and others tried to trip him up in his theology and tried to trip him up in his actions and spit on him and crucified him and put a robe on him and a crown of thorns. Made fun of him. It's there, it says he didn't defend himself. And it's there with the cup of suffering and what was coming down the road that he said, not my will. And that's why he could go and face what he faced, because there was complete relational trust because of his vertical relationship with the Father. So he said, I can only do what I see the Father do. And it didn't matter what others were saying and doing, because he trusted there was this complete connection. There was no disconnect. Jesus was secure in his identity, completely secure in the love of the Father. We on the other hand, we have incomplete vertical relational trust. Where Jesus had complete vertical relational trust, we on the other hand, we have incomplete vertical relational trust. And as a result of that, we only see and we only know in part. And in response to that, we have incomplete horizontal confidence. Our confidence, because it's broken, it's not complete vertically, it plays out in how we live our lives horizontally with others and how we see and how we interact with the world and the people around us. It's incomplete as well. Where his motives were pure and good, and where he was steadfast and where he was all in and right, you and I, we have to check our motives. We have to be aware of our motives. We have to come back and really evaluate and look at our heart and ask ourselves what's going on in our hearts. We have to look inside. We have to look deep. You and I, we have to check our motives, and it can be a struggle to manage and to manage and to keep our motives in the right place, because we can find ourselves veering. We can find ourselves getting off track. If you think about the woman caught in adultery, some theologians believe that the whole thing was a trap, that they had orchestrated, that the religious leaders who wanted to trip Jesus up, that they had orchestrated this whole trap. And so when they caught this woman, it's like they set a trap for her, and she walked right into it, of course, and it's not as if she wasn't guilty. But there were those that in the moment, right, who wanted to trip her up. And so they see that she was just some say and believe that she was just a pawn in the scheme of the Pharisees to trip Jesus up, to find reason to disregard his ministry, right, to discredit who he was and what he was doing and the miracles and things that were going on. And here's the thing, they had no regard for Jesus. They had no regard for the woman. And so we can look at that on the outside, right, and read into it and recognize that there were unhealthy motives involved in this. That there was a scheme at play, not only to hurt this woman, but to hurt Jesus. So their motives were unhealthy. What about our motives? It's not always easy to see and to separate ourselves from them, is it? It gets pretty complicated when our motives are off, but we still may be doing good and seeing good, and sometimes it's really hard to separate ourselves from our motives. And at other times we know our motives are off, and we know that the results and our performance and things are just off, they're not clicking. But other times we know our motives are off, but things seem to be going okay, and so it's easy to assume in that place, hey, well, I guess I can just keep going on the way I'm going on, because look, there's fruit, there's things going on in our ministry. We see that all the time in the world today. Even in the church, where there have been issues of adultery and issues of lack of integrity that go on in leadership, and yet for some reason the church continues to be blessed and great things seem to be going on and fruitfulness, I'm speaking generically. And yet there's things going on behind the scenes and that involve, the motives of the heart in leaders. And so it's easy to think, well, I guess everything's okay, so I guess I can continue on in this path. It's so important that we come back and we check ourselves and we check our motives. What about our motives? Because they get pretty complicated, don't they? So for this morning, we want to keep it on a particular level. We want to keep it at the level of recognizing the healthy weight that comes from unhealthy motives. We're not going to go off on any rabbit trails. That's where we want to keep it. We want to keep it right there. We want to keep it on the importance of recognizing the unhealthy weight that comes from unhealthy motives. Because motivation matters. See, this is the weight we're better off unloading in life. The weight that comes with unhealthy motives. When we recognize the unhealthy weight that comes from unhealthy motives and we throw them off, we will find ourselves traveling light. It's always the better way to travel. It's good for you, and listen, it's good for others. Always remember that. Traveling light, it's good for me, it's good for you, and it's good for the people around us. It's good for the people that we love, the people that love us. It's always good to remember that. So we're going to throw off a couple things here. The first thing we're going to throw off is we're going to throw off the need to prove ourselves. And so if motivation matters, and we're going to travel light as it relates to our motives, the motives of our heart, the motives of our activity, our behavior, all of those things, the first thing we're going to throw off is we're going to throw off the need to prove ourselves. So as it relates to motives, think of all the problems of the heart. All the problems of the heart that stem from our need to prove ourselves to God and to others. How many of us, we live our lives, and that's what we live our lives doing, trying to prove our worth, trying to prove our value, trying to prove our worth to God and to prove our value to others. See, some of us are still trying to prove our love and our devotion to God. We're still struggling to find that space and place where I'm not trying to cover my nakedness before God, where I'm not trying to compensate for those areas where I feel like I fall short, where I have to defend my brokenness before God, where I'm striving for love, striving for love and acceptance, living to prove, needing to say, see, God, look at me. Here, look what I'm doing now. See, now you have reason to finally accept me. Now you have reason to finally love me. How many of us are living in that place where we're striving? And we're still trying to find reason within ourselves and within our performance for God to finally have reason to love us, to see us, to look upon us, and to approve. It amazes me how early we learn to live for the approval of others and how important that becomes in our lives, it can become in our lives. Maybe that's you and you're still living for the approval of dad or mom because you had an absentee dad or a mom that just wasn't engaged, and so you grew up with this living underneath that pressure to prove yourself, to prove your worth. Feeling like you just need to say something, do something, just to hear those words, I'm proud of you, son, or I'm proud of you, daughter. And if you live underneath the weight of that pressure, underneath the weight of trying to prove yourself, then you know just how heavy that can become, how weighty that can become in your life. It's no way to live. So maybe that's what drives you. Maybe that's what drives us, me, to work long hours, to have nice things, and to be somebody so that we can finally say, look, see, now you have reason to be proud of me. Now you have reason to love me, to accept me, to want to be a part of my life. Because Jesus was secure in his identity and in the love of the Father, he lived free from the need to prove his worth and his value to others. It was complete here, and because it was complete here, it was lived out here. It's why he could be okay. I know that my Father loved and cared for me. This, however, doesn't mean that I still don't struggle with proving my worth and value to others. All right, confession time. I love that when someone says, I have a confession, it's like, if someone's doing something, it's like everybody, if your head's down, it's like everybody pops their heads up. They lean in a little bit. What's he going to say? Some of you have heard this and know this about me, but I'm a people pleaser. And many of you are aware of that and know that some good things come with that, but it sucks when it becomes unhealthy. And there's some unhealthiness that comes potentially from that as well if we allow it to, and I've allowed it to. And, about 6 months ago, 6 to 8 months, the past year, just had a lot of struggle in that area. And that weight just really began to press in and upon me, and it really, messed me up in many ways. Feeling like I wasn't adding up to be enough. Feeling that weight of trying to prove something. Think of the weight we carry to prove our worth to others. That weight impacts my motivation. And it can be very exhausting if that's what I'm living for. If that's what's driving me, consuming me. Imagine how freeing it would be if we began to free ourselves of some of that weight. This is what you get. What if we could come to that point and that place in our lives and our thinking and our minds? If we could as a church, if you could in your own life, where we could come to that place and say, this is what you get. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. This is who we are as a church. And you get around us, and you're going to find out a few things about us. And you're going to find out that we're authentic. And we're going to encourage and challenge you to get closer to Jesus. And that's a passion of ours. We're committed to developing devoted followers of Jesus. This is our mission, and we're crazy about that. But we don't have all the ministries and the programs that some larger churches have. And we may not be exactly what you're looking for. But if you stick around and you get to know us, you're going to find that we love Jesus with all our hearts, and we love people, and we want to be a blessing to our world. We want to be a blessing to our community. We want to see the world become a better place. And so we're committed to that. We're committed to living on mission. But if that's not good enough for you, there are a lot of great churches here in Gig Harbor. Amen? So, that sounds good, doesn't it? To be able to come to that point in that place to be okay. I love that idea of being okay with who we are and what we have. But like it or not, it sounds good, but it takes work. It takes intentionality. It takes taking our thoughts captive and being careful about what we allow to enter into our minds, what we allow ourselves to speak to one another. So we have to work at it. But imagine how freeing it would be to be largely good with who we are. This is something I've been, really intentional working at, being intentional to work at in these last few months is just to be good with who I am and where we're at. Listen, God loves us not for who we are and what we do. He loves us because that is who He is, and that's what He does. That's who He is, and that's what He does. God is love. Let that sink in. Nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to prove your worth, to determine your worth before God. He's already demonstrated. He's already proved the extent of His love for humanity, for His love for you and I. He did it by dying on the cross. He did it when He followed through with what He said He was going to follow through. He made a way where there was no way. He made a way for broken humanity to come before Him, to experience Him. He's already proven your worth. Travel lighter, learn to throw off the need to prove yourself. Secondly, throw off the need to preserve the image we have of ourselves. The image we have of ourselves. In 1954, an English artist by the name of Graham Sutherland, he was commissioned by Parliament to paint a portrait of Winston Churchill. Graham had a reputation of being a modernist painter and was drawn to the idea of capturing the real person, reality. So think about that. So he was commissioned to draw, to paint Winston Churchill, but to paint that picture, to capture him as he was, not as what he wanted to be or what he saw himself being or what he wished he was, but as he was. So it was presented to Winston Churchill by Parliament for his 80th birthday. And here's the thing, Winston Churchill, he hated it. He wanted nothing to do with it. He felt like it didn't depict him or his life in the way that he thought that it should or the way that he wanted it to. So the painting created a clash in Winston between who he really was and who he wanted to be remembered by. There was this clash of image. He had an image he wanted to protect. The image in the painting didn't fit the image he wanted to be remembered by. So what's interesting about this story is, if you do a little bit of research, is Winston Churchill's wife had the painting burned because she wanted to protect her husband. She wanted to preserve Winston's legacy. She wanted him to be remembered as a hero. Winston Churchill wanted to be remembered as a hero, not as an older man who was getting up in his years, who wasn't the physical, statured person he was in his younger years. He wanted his image to be carried on in a certain way as a hero, and he felt like the painting didn't depict that, and as a result, the painting was burned. What is it that you have in your mind about your image? What do others say about you? What do you want to be remembered by or as? Just think that the idea of having an image and living up to that image, listen, it comes with a price. It will require you to protect that image. What's so interesting about today is one of the things that they say about the political landscape of today is that the idea of image is not so much what really goes on behind the scenes and who a person really is in terms of their character, but it's about what people perceive. So in that sense, it's all about perception. And so you want to perceive yourselves, publicly in a certain way, even if it's not who you are and what you are privately, outside of the perception of other people. And so what is the idea there of protecting there? It's protecting perception. It's protecting what people perceive us to be or what we want them to perceive us to be. It's interesting. So what is it that you want others to see, that you want to protect? See, even something good can become a source of unhealthy weight when it becomes the thing that we have to preserve at all costs. As good as your image may be, I would argue that traveling light is better than living under the weight of having to preserve that image, whatever that image is. It doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we just walk away from it totally. It just means that we don't obsess over it. It means that we're not consumed by it. That it doesn't become that thing that entertains our minds, the thing that consumes the most amount of energy, that consumes us and our resources, and the thing that we pour our resources and our energy into. There is a better, freer way to live. Can you see that? It's exhausting when we have to live up, or keep up, I should say, with the Joneses, because you'll find that it becomes this all-elusive thing. It's never enough. Because there's always going to be somebody with bigger, better, and more. It's exhausting when we can't allow ourselves to age. Aging is a natural part of life. Everybody gets older. There are no exceptions. Be healthy, eat healthy, take care of your body. But why is it bad to get older? When I was sharing this part of the talk with my wife and talking about it, she's like, "Are you listening to yourself?" She'd say, "Man, you're preaching to yourself." It's okay. Let it be okay that we aren't what we used to be. And I think that's what I struggle with a little bit. There's things that I still want to do. But we know with age comes, certain realities, and we may not be able to do them as well or as often or, whatever as it relates to that. But it's okay that we aren't what we used to be. It's okay that we're getting older. The freedom comes in not being consumed with looking and trying to be younger. The freedom comes in letting go of that, of throwing off, having to preserve that image. It's exhausting when we don't give ourselves grace to live up to our image expectations. And if you find yourself in that place where you have an image expectation that you have to live up to, that you have to protect and preserve at all costs, you're gonna find that you're living under this heavy weight, that's a heavy thing to live under, to have to protect and preserve. So think about it. In what other ways is preserving our image exhausting? So let me say this, be the funny person. If you're the funny person, continue to be the funny person. Laughter is good, and we need funny people in our lives. Be the generous person. Be the nice person, the nice guy. Be the outgoing person. Be the person who lights up the room when they walk into the room. Be the challenging person, the person that challenges authority and, in good ways and challenges structures and ways of doing things, because we need those people in our lives, in our churches, in our communities. Be the answer person. Be the whatever. But if our sense of identity is tied and wrapped up in that image, if that image is the thing that we must protect and preserve above all else, just know that it will come with a cost, and that cost is it will come with a heaviness. Because now we have an image to preserve. Now we have something we have to protect. And as long as we have to preserve it and protect that, we have to live up to certain expectations and know with that expectation, there will be a certain weight that comes with that. That's a big heavy to live under. Why live there? Listen, why live there when we don't have to? Luke 17:33 says, whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. Like an onion, thrown off the need to prove myself and the need to preserve my image, as important as those are, and as much as I encourage you to do those things, I also encourage us too to do this. Like the layers in an onion, they usually are an indicator of something deeper, darker going on inside of us. So we want to throw off those things, and we want to look inside, because there are things that go on underneath that impact and affect our motivation, like pride, like fear, like arrogance, like self-righteousness, pain, hurt, bitterness, unforgiveness, jealousy, right? We're going to throw off the weight that so easily encumbers us and the sin that entangles us. So we're going to throw off and we're going to look inside. Travel light. We have a destiny. We're people of destiny. You have a destiny. We have work to do for the kingdom. Don't let wrong motives trip us up. So I want to end with this. What do you need to throw off today? What do you need to throw off today?